I do appreciate it, and I thank you, and I thank both you and Senator Heller for holding this hearing and staying on these issues. It's really important that we examine the developments following this recall issue, and I know you've been working very hard on this issue. I know we all share the desire to get the answers and ensure that this doesn't happen again. GM has admitted via consent order that it failed to report this safety-related defect to NHTSA in a timely manner, and the internal report prepared by Mr. Valukas is called GM's delay in addressing the ignition switch defect a failure of accountability, of oversight, of urgency, and of engineering. And as we all know, these delays cost lives, and I know I express my deepest sympathies to those who were injured or lost loved ones in car accidents involving the GM vehicles that have now been recalled. And I guess the question I have, I'd like to direct to Ms. Barra, and I welcome, I would say, the very public steps that you've taken thus far to address the needed changes within GM, some of which you've discussed in your written testimony. But I'm also reminded of statements that your immediate predecessor, Mr. Akerson, also discussed in his efforts to create a culture of accountability at GM following the company's bankruptcy and federal bailout. Mr. Valukas uncovered many troubling findings regarding a lack of accountability and urgency among GM employees and senior managers, and my question is, in your view, are these vestiges of the past or a sign that a cultural change has yet to take hold at GM?
I think when you look at culture change, it happens over a long period of time, and it's by leadership actions. I would say Mr. Akerson did extensive work to make sure drove accountability and drove the right behavior. But I think we're on a continuum of making that cultural change. I would frankly say we're accelerating that now with the work and the very open and transparent way that we're dealing with this issue and the way we're sharing it with employees. And they want to change. They want to make sure we have the right systems and processes in place. But I would say, you know, Mr. Akerson started on that journey, and we're continuing and accelerating it.
And how do you plan to measure that change?
I think on a couple of fronts. I mean, you know, one, on the very real part of, from a safety perspective, we've already broken down the silos, and we are mining data. We're using some of the latest data analytic techniques to make sure information comes from across the company. We've engaged employees, and they are participating in our Speak Up for Safety program. But I would also say, you know, we do a workplace of choice survey every 18 months, and we've seen improvements in that. That will be another key, very objective way that we'll look to make sure we're driving the right openness. But I can tell you, I get hundreds of emails from our employees on a weekly, monthly basis, and they're engaged, and that to me is the best sign, because it's actions, not words, that are going to change the behaviors.
And what role do you think the Board of Directors has in changing the culture?
I think, you know, the role of the board is to very clearly state their expectations of how they want, how the company should operate. And me as the CEO, it is my job to make sure we're living up to their expectations across the company with my leadership team.
I'd like to direct a question to Mr. O'Neill, and this is based on the Valukas report. The ignition switch that your company developed appears to have been plagued with both electrical and mechanical problems. Problems that weren't limited to the switch having a lower torque than specified. In addition, a GM document from 2001 released by the House Energy and Commerce Committee mentions quite a bit of frustration on the part of GM and COYO in dealing with these Delphi switches due to electrical failures and to Delphi's inability to deliver parts on time for testing purposes. Taken together, this evidence would seem to indicate the problems with Delphi switch were greater than we were initially led to believe. Now that these ignition switch issues, I should say, have come to light, have you gone back and reviewed these concerns and determined what Delphi will do differently in the future?
We did go back and look extensively at all of the documentation, and we found nothing that was abnormal in terms of the product development. And ultimately, how the problems were addressed that you sometimes run into as you move from development to production, et cetera. As I said, our product, it met the requirements. It entered a ignition assembly system that had other products. Our part met its requirement. I'm assuming the other products met their requirements. But when they come together, they form a system, And as Mrs. Barrow said earlier, it is someone else's job to make sure, in this case it was the OE, to make sure that those products work in total harmony when they come together. And so we've gone back and understood our role in that. I think the new legislation of how safety systems interact from a safety perspective versus part, we totally embraced. And we will work diligently with General Motors over this issue.
In 2006, GM authorized a change the ignition switch, but didn't change the part number. As a supplier, is it a common practice for Delphi to allow a manufacturer to change a part and not change the part number?
We have, in 2013, we had about 120,000 changes, engineering changes, and only about 40% of those actually had a part number change. So it's quite normal not to change the part number.
Do other manufacturers do the same thing?
Yes.
Okay. Madam Chair, my time's expired.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.